Welcome back. Now, this is looking pretty good. We're getting some hit effects. Our enemy is stumbling in the correct direction. This is looking great. But we'd like to have some more hit effects than just enemy reactions. We'd like to hear that sword hitting the flesh. So in this video, we're going to make a meta sound for when the enemy gets hit and go about playing that sound when we get a hit. Now, to do that, we need some hit sounds. So you're going to go to the GitHub page for this course. The link will be in the resources, and go into the downloads folder into sounds. Now we have our whoosh and our blade 1. We've already downloaded those, but we also have hit flesh 1 through 4. So these are some flesh hitting sound effects that we're going to download and add to our project. So go ahead and download these wave files, and once you're done, you should have these hit flesh 1 through 4 sound waves. We're going to get these into our project. So here in our project, we have an audio folder where we have shink and whoosh. Let's go ahead and get those hit flesh sounds in here. So I'm going to click import and find my sound effects. I'm going to highlight all of them and click open. And now we have these hit flesh sound effects. So they sound pretty graphic, which is pretty awesome. And we're going to make a meta sound using these sound waves. So let's go into our meta sounds folder, right click and go to sounds and meta sound source. We're going to call this SFX hit flesh. So let's go ahead and open hit flesh, and we're going to follow the same process we've been following to make our other meta sounds. So we're going to need an input. We'll click plus. We'll rename the input. I'm going to call this hit flesh. Now, hit flesh can be an array. We're going to change its type. Searching for wave, we're going to choose wave asset, and we're going to check that checkbox is array. And now we can drag in some sound effects here in our input array. So I'm going to bring this tab up here so I can see that default value and get my content browser open to my audio folder so I can select all 4 of these hit flesh wave assets and drag them right in to the default values. And now our input array has 4 inputs. And we're going to drag that hit flesh straight in, and right off the bat, we'll shuffle them. So let's get shuffle, and we'll hook up our on play straight in to next. And we're also going to need a wave player. So from the on next output of our shuffle, we're going to search for wave player, get that wave player, make ourselves some room here, and I'd like to randomize the pitch for these sounds. So I'm going to drag out of on play and get a random float node, and we'll experiment with this, but I'd like this random float to raise the pitch quite a bit because these are some hefty hit sounds. So I want to hear what they sound like with the pitch raised a bit. I'm going to use a value of 8 for the min, and the max can have a value of 10. And we'll plug that straight into pitch shift. Now we're also going to get a random float so we can randomize the volume. So let's get random float. And for this one, I'll have simply a minimum of 0.5 and a maximum of 0.9. And we'll multiply this with one of the outputs. We'll use out left and multiply audio by float, hooking that up, and that can go into the output. And of course, our other output, on finished, needs our on finished from the wave player. So now we can hook up the value from the shuffle to the wave player, and we can press play, and we can hear what it sounds like. So one of those sounds doesn't quite belong, and I believe it's going to be hit flesh 4. I think I'm going to go ahead and remove that from our hit flesh array. That happens to be my second element here, index 1. I'm going to go ahead and delete that one. I don't think it's quite impactful enough for a sword impact, maybe for stabbing with a dagger or something like that. So I'm going to leave that one out of it. And now I think this sounds great. All right, so we have a sound effect. Now we need to play this when our enemy gets hit. And that's going to bring us back into our Visual Studio project, and we can go into our enemy class. And I'd like to have a variable here for the sound asset that we'd like to play when the enemy gets hit. That way we could change this from enemy to enemy if we wish to do that. So here in the private section, we're going to make a uSoundBase pointer called hitSound. And again, SoundBase is the base class for both the SoundCue and the MetaSound asset type. So we can store a value of that MetaSound asset type here in this pointer, and I'd like to set this from blueprints. So I'm going to have a uProperty here. And I'd like to be able to set it on the default blueprint, but it would be kind of nice to be able to change this on individual instances in the level, which means I'm going to want a different specifier from edit defaults only. Try to think of the specifier that we need. That's right, it's edit anywhere. That way we can edit it in the details panel in the default blueprint for our enemy, as well as in the details panel for an instance in the world that we have selected. Now I'm going to go ahead and place this in a category called sounds. So now that we have hitSound, we'd like to play a sound at the location where we're getting hit. So we'll go into enemy.cpp, and here in our getHit function, we can go ahead and play some effects right after our directional hitReact function. Now to play a sound, we need gameplay statics. And I'm going to show you a really quick way to figure out the header file we need to include. Straight from Google, I can search for gameplay statics, and it's the first thing that pops up. It's the docs in UnrealEngine.com. Here's gameplay statics. And the function I'm interested in is called play sound at location. So we have a couple of play sound functions. We have play sound 2D, which will just play the sound. Its volume will be unaffected no matter where it plays in the world. It could play across the entire map and we'll still hear it full volume. But play sound at location is designed to play a sound at a specific location in space, and if we set it up right, it should be quieter the farther away it is. So that's the function we're interested in. Now, all the way up at the top of this docs page, we have the include, which is kismet/gameplaystatics.h. That's the header file where this static function library is located. We're going to include that so we can use gameplay statics. So we'll include kismet/gameplaystatics at the top of enemy.cpp, and that way we can access that play sound at location function. And I'm going to do it right here as soon as our enemy gets hit. So we'll do that in our getHit function. Now, before we play this sound, we're going to be using our sound base called hitSound, which means we need to make sure that that's not a null pointer. If we forget to set it in the blueprint, then it will be null. So we're going to make sure we don't access any null pointers by making sure this pointer is valid before we use it. So we'll say if hitSound. And if we make it this far, hitSound is a valid pointer, and we can use it. So we're going to get gameplay statics and use the scope resolution operator and start typing play sound, and we see play sound 2D and play sound at location. Don't worry about those exec play sound 2Ds. Those are different functions. We don't want those. We want the actual play sound at location function. So I'm going to start the parentheses and go ahead and hit enter, and we have IntelliSense very helpfully popping up this little pop-up showing us the input parameters we need. And the first is a world context object. Well, we know that we can use this for a world context object, and that's what we're going to do. The next is a sound base called sound, and we have a sound base. It's called hitSound. So we're going to pass that in right there. And the next input parameter is the location. So the function is called play sound at location, which means it needs the location to play the sound at. Now, here in getHit, we have a location for the impact point. So we might as well just pass that in for that sound location. So we're going to pass in impact point right there. And the rest of these input parameters are optional. They have default values. They're parameters for volume multiplier, pitch multiplier, start time if we want to play this sound somewhere halfway through the sound, and so on. We're going to leave all those out of it and just terminate the function here with a semicolon. So now that we have this function call, as soon as our enemy gets hit, we'll play this sound, provided that we set it from blueprints, as this pointer will be null otherwise. So I'm going to go ahead and save all, and I'd like to start live coding. Now, if I press the hot reload button, I want to point something out that we've been sort of overlooking the whole time. It says save changes and press Ctrl-Alt F11 to recompile code. This is a nice little shortcut that allows us to eliminate a few mouse clicks from our workflow. So if I wanted to, I could save the changes in Visual Studio and simply Ctrl-Alt F11 to hot reload straight away. So next time we hot reload, we'll give that a try. All right, so we finished live coding, and now we need to set that parameter, that hit sound, on our enemy. Now we made this edit anywhere, which means we could simply select the enemy here, and in the details panel, we can search for sound, and under the sounds category, there's our hit sound. We could set it right here if we wanted to. I could search for SFX _ hit flash and select it there. And hit sound will be a valid pointer now, at least for this particular instance. So if I press play and grab a weapon and swing, now I can hear that sound, and it sounds disgusting and great. That's amazing. Now, I set it on the individual instance and not the default blueprint. So that's an important distinction to remember. If I go into Blueprints, Enemy, BP Enemy, and I take a look here, I can even search without opening the full blueprint editor for sounds. Here's my sounds category. Hit sound is not set here. So even though it's set on the instance in the world, it's not set on the default blueprint. Now, the implications of this means that if I drag another enemy in here, notice its hit sound is not set. And if I go up to it with the sword and I hit it, I think it's this one, I don't get a sound, but I do get a sound on that one there. So that is something to keep in mind if you're setting it on the individual blueprint instance in the world and not the default blueprint. So a good rule of thumb is to always at least set something in the default blueprint. That way, there's an asset there that this particular actor can fall back on if you forget to set that value on an individual instance in the world. Now, I'm pretty sure all my enemies are going to want to use this same one, so I can simply search for SFX _ hit flash and choose that. But because I made it edit anywhere, if I do decide to make a different enemy and a different sound effect, I can set that on those individual instances in the world. So now that I set it here in the default blueprint, I can come back and see that both of my enemies in the world have their hit sound set, and I should hear that sound if I hit either one of them. There it is. And on this one, there it is, and it sounds great. Now, let's talk a little bit about this play sound at location thing. You see, you might have caught when I told you that play sound at location will play the sound at a lower volume if it's farther away if we set it up correctly. Now, we haven't set it up correctly for that to work, and I'm going to prove that to you by going to BP Enemy and opening the full blueprint editor, and I'm going to go ahead and on Begin Play, use that same function called Play Sound at Location, and this is the same function we used in C++. In fact, if I hover over it, it says target is gameplay statics. So that's the gameplay statics play sound at location function. We see that it's blueprint callable. Now I can select that SFX hit flash right here, and in begin play, those enemies will play the sound. Now let's see what happens if that sound plays at a lower volume. I'm going to press play, And that sound was pretty darn loud. It was not really attenuated. We say attenuated when we mean that the sound is altered some way by physical properties such as distance from our ears. Now, we want our sound attenuated, which means our sound needs attenuation configured for it. Now, to do that, we need to make an asset called a sound attenuation. So we're going to go back to our audio folder here. And right here, we can simply right click, go to sounds, and right here we see this type of asset called sound attenuation. And the pop-up says defines how a sound changes volume with distance to the listener. That's exactly what we want. So we're going to select that, and we're going to call this SA for sound attenuation, and we'll name this Hit Flash. Now let's double click on this sound attenuation, and it has a few properties here that determine how the sound is going to attenuate or get lower in volume the farther the sound source is from us. We have an attenuation function, and it's set to linear, and you can choose a number of mathematical functions that determine the behavior of the sound as it's getting farther away. And the attenuation shape is by default set to sphere, but you can change that shape as well. Basically, what this means is that we'll have a sphere, an invisible sphere surrounding the sound source, and that sphere is going to have a radius. This inner radius property determines how close we can get before we just hear that sound at full volume. So by default, it's set to 400, which means if we're 400 units or less from the sound source, we'll hear the full volume of the sound source. But we have a fall-off distance. And if we're outside of the fall-off distance, that means we won't hear anything. So let's leave these sound attenuation settings as they are and apply this sound attenuation to our sound effect called Hit Flash. Now here in Hit Flash, we're going to click on Source, right here, this gear icon, and in the Details panel, we have an attenuation category with attenuation settings. And if we open the drop-down, there are some sound attenuations that exist in our project. Some were migrated over from other asset packs, like Valley of the Ancient, but this one, SA Hit Flash, we just made that. And we're going to attenuate our sound, our Hit Flash, with this sound attenuation asset. Now, our attenuation function by default is linear, which means the sound volume will linearly decrease as we're getting farther and farther from the sound source. Now, what I'm interested in is natural sound. That's going to give us the most natural type of sound fall off. It's going to fall off the way that sound naturally falls off. Now, we're going to see how this works. And before we do, I'm going to go back to BP Enemy, and I'd like to play this sound repeatedly. And to do that, I can use a delay node. If I drag off and type delay and select the delay function, this allows us to have a delay for a specific duration, such as 1 second. And as soon as this is finished, I can take the completed output execution pin and drag it back to the beginning of play sound at location. And what this will do is it'll play that sound again and start the delay again, and a second later, play the sound again. Now, the wire is kind of going back behind. I can't really see what it's doing, but if I drag this down and I get this wire and double click on it, I'll get a reroute node. I'm going to double click a couple times so we can see where these wires are going. And now it's very clear that as soon as I play the sound, I'll hit that delay and then go through this wire back to play sound at location again, and we'll play this sound every 1 second. So that is how this is going to work. And of course, this is play sound at location, right? So we need a location. And since this is just for testing, I'm going to right click and get actor location and hook that straight into play sound at location, compile that, and now our enemies will play this sound at their own location. So let's press play. Now I can hear the sound, but it's pretty quiet, and I'm going to move around this map and just let you hear what I'm hearing as we get closer and farther away from each enemy. So as you can see, the sound is getting louder as I'm closer to the sound source, and it's getting quieter the farther away I get, which is more realistic, and that's exactly what I wanted. Excellent job. We now have hit sounds, and it sounds great when we hit the enemy. We don't have blood yet, so that's the next thing we're going to take care of. I'll see you in the next video.